I want to thank the College of Southern Maryland for inviting me. It's interesting to be a part of this connection series because it sounds like you're going to have a whole year of being able to think about these issues, which is wonderful, and I'm very honored to be part of it. And thank you, Wayne Carlin, for inviting me, and Neil Dwyer for arranging everything. It's been really fun. I've gotten to spend some time with them and also come down to this area, which is beautiful, except it's not the best weather. So anyway, I'm really happy to be here. And so I'm going to talk to you a little bit. I'm going to read some from the book, and then I would love to hear your questions. I know a lot of you were with us this afternoon, but if you're out of questions, that's okay. But if you have more questions, great. And some ones who weren't there, I'll be really interested to hear what you have to say. So most of you, I think, are college students, and some of you probably aren't. I'm sort of speaking, I thought about this in advance, and I decided to speak to the college students in particular, but I think that what I have to say also pertains to those of you who are beyond college, so I hope you'll hear it and think about what it might mean for you. So the college students here, I know that people are always telling you how to live your life and what to do, and that's a big drag. I remember, I went through it myself. It totally stressed me out, and I get that. I hated it when people told me what to do with my life. So now I'm going to tell you what to do with your life, and I hope you don't mind. You have to forgive me, but it's important to me, and I think that if you listen, you'll start to see why it would be important for you too. Here's what I would want to tell you to do. Travel. Okay? Get out of here. Go somewhere else. And I know that for some of you, you're just thinking, yes, that is exactly what I want to do. It's like I just handed you candy or something. And then there's others of you that don't see the point, or it sounds totally scary. And I just want you to know that I know all about scary and scared. And I wrote the book on Scared. It was my first book. It was called The House on Dream Street, and it was a memoir about traveling to Vietnam and living there. And it's all about being scared and still doing it anyway. So I know about scared. I'm talking to you, all of you that are jumping out of your seats because you want to travel, and those of you who are hanging onto your seats because you really don't know what that would mean to you. But I think you should do it. It could be the hardest thing that you do in your life, but it will make you stronger and wiser and more interesting and more interested and a better person, really. I mean that. So to explain, I'm going to tell you my story of travel, and it relates to Vietnam. When I was growing up in the 1960s and 1970s, the war was going on in Vietnam, and I was a kid. And I remember it in the background on the TV. The nightly news was always about the war, and it seemed to me that the war had always been going on and that it would always be going on, and I couldn't imagine a beginning or end. But the imagery was very generalized. There were bombs exploding and children crying. I didn't understand anything about what was happening. It was just this place where people were dying. My image of the Vietnamese, what I thought of those people over there that lived in that country that was at war, I had two images. One was starving, dying victims. You've seen them on TV yourselves in other wars. And then the other image was of the enemy. Like you'd see this sort of shadowy figure that was responsible for all the death. Or that's the way I took it for myself, not understanding it. So Vietnam was just, it wasn't really a place, it was like an emotion for this country. And that's the way it remained for me for all my childhood and growing up and going to college and getting older and working. Then in the 1990s, when I was in my late 20s, I went backpacking through Asia, and I was lucky. I got to travel for 9 months very cheaply, just with a backpack, and I went all over, and India and Thailand and Indonesia. And in Thailand, I was traveling with a friend, and we met some other low budget backpackers who had just been into Vietnam, and this was it was the very end of 1989, beginning of 1990. So the war had been over for 15 years. It ended in 1975. And right in 1975, basically, the doors to Vietnam closed, especially for Americans. There was no way to go in there as a tourist. Very few Americans went at all. And in 1990, it slowly began to open up again, and they started offering tourist visas to just Americans who wanted to go in. And so my friend and I said, we didn't say, oh, great, we can go to Vietnam. We said, we should go to Vietnam. You know, it was like if you're in Poland, you sort of think, I should go to Auschwitz. I should see this place where all these terrible things happened. So we said, we should go. It was kind of a sense of dread, but obligation. As Americans, we should see this place. So we went, and maybe this won't be any surprise to you, but it was a huge surprise to us. It was so much more than the site of this terrible war. It was a place that had thousands of years of history and a very rich culture. And the people in Vietnam had spent 15 years moving beyond the war. And the fact that their country was beginning to open up to the West was the main thing on their mind. They were so excited to meet people from the outside, and especially Americans. And so, a lot of them spoke English in the southern part of the country because so many Americans had been in Vietnam during the war. And so they wanted to talk and engage. And it was almost like we were long-lost family members who had been apart for a long time, and now we had to get back together and rehash everything. So needless to say, this was not what I expected. It was something totally, totally different, and so much better, and so much more hopeful and happier. And suddenly the war became part of this long history of this country and this culture that I felt like I really wanted to find out more about. So I was already a journalist, and I already obviously loved to travel, but I had never spent any longer length of time in one place. So I decided I was going to move to Vietnam and study the language and really try to learn about the country in a different way. And even then, I thought, I'm a writer, and one thing I can do is try to find out about this place and write about it for an American audience who probably, like me, only thinks about the place as the site of a war. And so in 1992, I moved to Hanoi, and that was the scary part. I mean, it was really, I studied Vietnamese for 10 weeks at an intensive language course in the US, and then I had, from my teacher there, I had some connections, and I found a place to live, but I was all alone there, and I couldn't speak the language more than to say, you know, hello and how old I was. That was like everybody wanted to know how old you were. It was really scary. And I don't want you to think that it's only brave people. Oh no.
Now they're just toying with us.
If it goes off again, I'm going to get my iPhone and try to shine a light on it. I don't actually know how to do that, but one of you does, I'm sure. So I know it works. So I want to say that it's not just brave people that do that kind of thing. The rest of us can do it too. You just have to decide you really want to do something. So it got easier and life got better. I learned the language. I made friends. I know I'm sort of going over this very quickly, but it's important for me to let you know that these are things that you can do also. The first book that I wrote, which was about that experience living in Vietnam, is called The House on Dream Street, and it's my memoir about it. And I sort of feel like I wrote the book on fear. I mean, you know, because it's all about how afraid I was when I first got there and how I sort of began to get over it. So by going there, I learned so much. I learned to see the world in new ways, and I learned that I could kind of, by going somewhere else, it's like you get a completely different perspective also on our own culture. So I began to grow a lot more confident in my abilities. It did so much for me as an individual person. It gave me the confidence to do a lot of things, and sort of following through on the things that you feel fearful about and doing it anyway can do so much for you in all the other things that you try to do, you want to do in your life, or you think you want to do, but you don't know if you can. Once you do a few things that are scary and you manage, then you start to feel even more confident. So what I wanted to do, as I said, was I wanted to give Americans a sense of Vietnam as separate from the war. And some of the things, so I kept a journal. I wrote a lot, like every day, about the kinds of things that I was seeing. And there were several things. As I said, the Vietnamese were, the main thing in their minds was the fact that their country was starting to open for the first time. So they had been living in a very controlled economy, which meant that they stood in ration lines just to get like the rice that they needed. If they went into the department store and they wanted soap, there was one kind of soap. So life was really simple and limited and difficult in a lot of ways. I mean, my friends have told me about literally spending a whole day in a ration line just to get their monthly supply of rice. And can you imagine how inefficient that is? Like, that's a whole day of not being able to do something more productive. So suddenly, when the war, I mean, not the war, when the country began to open up to the West, there was trade beginning and money was coming in, and there was more than one kind of soap on the shelves. Suddenly there's soap from Bulgaria and soap maybe from France, and you know, people are starting to have money because they too are able to engage in small businesses. And so the economic changes had a tremendous effect on people's lives. I'm going to just give you like one example. When I first lived there in the early 90s, one of the main ways that people sort of assessed their success was whether or not they owned a motorbike. And for us, a motorbike just seems, even having a car, it just seems like, well, you either have one or you don't, and if you don't have one, it's kind of difficult. But in that culture at that time, if you had a motorbike, it meant everything. You could get to work. You didn't have to ride a bicycle an hour or an hour and a half across town to get to a job. You could ride a motorbike and get there in 15 minutes. Or maybe you could take a job that you wouldn't have been able to get to before because you have a means of transportation. There was no bus system, or not a viable bus system at that time. So a motorbike might mean that you could get another job. And that maybe you could make a living literally with the motorbike, because people started using motorbikes as taxis. So the motorbike could actually make money for you. Or another thing was that motorbike meant status. So particularly if you were a guy and you wanted to really impress a girl, you have a motorbike. If you don't have a motorbike and you only have a bike, you can sort of forget it. I mean, the girls would think, oh, well, you're not making it in the world. You don't have a motorbike. That was the main way of judging somebody's status. So these were things that I saw by being there at that time. And then there were social changes too, like suddenly there's discos, and people were going to discos at night, which they did not have during the socialist period, or else regular Vietnamese weren't allowed into them. So there's this kind of like social fluidity that started, and people going out more, and you know, love becomes a whole different thing when you have discos and dating and all that. So, you know, there were all kinds of different things that people were starting to negotiate and trying to understand, and that was causing a lot of family changes. And I wanted to explain some of that, like how a country was changing so fast just because money was starting to come in and opportunities were opening up. So those were things that were completely unexpected. That had nothing to do with the war, or the connections to the war were kind of slim. So one of the things that came out of that was that I developed these very intense friendships with Vietnamese people who were about my age. And when I was a kid watching the TV show, the Vietnamese suffering, or the Vietnamese bombing, or you know, the victims and the enemies, the people who later became my friends were living in Hanoi. Like, we were bombing Hanoi in 1972, and they were under the bombs. And that's a very intense thing to realize when you're becoming friends with someone, that you experience something so different from each other, and now here you are in the same room, and what do you say? How do you deal with that? I mean, just being able to develop a friendship with somebody who came from the other side like that made everything that I went through, or all the you know, struggles, worthwhile, because it makes you see the world in a totally different way. If I look at imagery of bombs falling down on Vietnam now, from that time, I think, oh, Thuy would have been under that, my friend Thuy, or something. You know, so war becomes something different when you can imagine the people who are under the bombs. It's no longer anonymous. It really means something. And then when I became friends with these people, I heard about their childhoods. I heard about the evacuations that they went through in order to get away from the bombs, or loss of family members, or physical differences, like people had really bad teeth because when they were kids, I mean, dental care was the last thing. They were just trying to keep themselves alive, so they didn't have dental care. People had rheumatism because they had slept on cold floors for a long time when they were young. There wasn't, you know, they didn't have good beds and stuff. So all these kind of physical differences. And you know, I come from America, and I had a good dentist, I had braces, you know. Those things seem to make us very, very different. Like, how could we understand each other? But the truth was that in the most essential ways, we understood each other perfectly. And these friendships developed out of those things, out of the fact that when I was with my women friends, we were talking about the same things you talk about with your women friends. Love and your future and your parents and your hopes to have children or your children. All those things that have to do with the most intimate aspects of our lives were the same. And those things were what bound us. And there's still differences, of course. There's still, I mean, obviously, all these experiences in our past that are so different, but in these fundamental ways, we're so much more the same. And by traveling, I got to see that. So when I was working on my first novel, that was really the seed of the story that I wanted to tell in If You Lived Here. It was this idea of two friends from totally different backgrounds coming together and finding that they really have so much more in common than they have that separates them. I know some of you have read the book. For those of you who haven't, I'll say it's a book about funeral directors and international adoption and Vietnam, but essentially it's a story about friendship. And there's two main characters. These two friends are, as Krista said, Shelley, who is an American. She's a funeral director, and she is trying to adopt her first child from Vietnam. And Mai, who is a Vietnamese American who runs a grocery store in a small city, Wilmington, which is actually where I live, in North Carolina. And she runs a grocery store, and she immigrated to the United States under very difficult, traumatic circumstances in the late 1980s, and she hasn't returned to Vietnam to be with her family. And so I'm going to read you just a little bit to introduce you to each of these characters. The very, very beginning of the book, I'll tell you, the chapters alternate points of view. So it starts with Shelley's point of view, and then it alternates to Mai's point of view. If you have a book, I can tell you, I'm reading on page 1. I think it's page 1. I'm just going to read the first couple of paragraphs. And so this is from Shelley's point of view, and it's just the very beginning of the book introducing her as a character and as a person. I guess that Merinos have been burying Rivenbarks for 70 years. I can't compare funeral customs here in Wilmington, North Carolina with funeral customs anywhere else, but I can tell you that Rivenbarks usually ask for the minister from First Baptist, flowers from Will Rader, and an open bar. Sometimes they read Psalm 23, and sometimes they read Psalm 121. It's hard to know what they'll request for a burial like this one, though, because there's nothing routine about the death of a child. This afternoon, on the first really beautiful day of spring, 4-year-old Oscar Rivenbark fell from the 3rd branch of the magnolia tree in his backyard. The ambulance managed to get him to the emergency room within about 15 minutes, but he died before the paramedics could wheel him in. My husband Martin and I run Marino & Sons, the biggest funeral home in the area. Between the two of us, we have over 40 years of experience. Still, we struggle when a child dies. Outsiders probably imagine that my world is all catastrophe, but most of our cases come from heart attacks, hospice, and Brightmoor, a retirement community a few miles away. It's not like there's a fatal car crash after every prom. Okay, so that is Shelley, and it doesn't. This very beginning part doesn't talk about the thing that she's really focused on, which is that she's trying to adopt a child, and she doesn't have any children herself. Her husband Martin. She's his second wife, and he has adult children, but she really wants to have a child. So this is the main thing in her life. Now I'm going to read you from page 20. and this is introducing Mai, who is the Vietnamese character. Oh, 19, sorry. This is from page 19. Okay, and she's called Mai through most of the book, but her full name is Xuân Mai, and you pronounce that X-U as Swa, so it's Xuân Mai. My mother didn't approve of wasting time. On winter nights in Hanoi, while my father and I played Chinese chess and my older sister Lan went off to visit friends, my mother would mop or practice her French or boil leftover bones for soup. My father often said he'd never expected my mother to become such a competent housekeeper. She had grown up the only child of the richest landowners in her village, a pampered girl destined for even greater wealth and privilege. She could have married a high-level official or gone to university in France, but my parents grew up in revolutionary times when you couldn't think of much but war. Instead of living a life of comfort, my mother became an orphan, then a soldier, and now an industrious homemaker in barren Hanoi. Instead of studying French literature in Paris, she learned to wring 3 dinners out of a sack of water morning glory, a handful of dried shrimp, and a few scoops of rice. My father himself taught her how to mop. From my father, I inherited the ability to relax. From my mother, the need to feel guilty about it. And I do still feel guilty after all these years that my own life, unlike that of my parents, has become so luxurious. I have my own business here in Wilmington, an expensive SUV, a house without a mortgage, a jacuzzi bathtub. My mother is long gone now, and I am long gone from my life in Hanoi and everyone I ever knew there. After 23 years, though, I still sometimes glance across my store and imagine my mother standing there, tapping her foot impatiently. My business impresses her, but she doesn't like to see me doing nothing. She crosses her arms impatiently, and I hear her say, "Nobody put a man on the moon by wasting time." So that is Mai. So the reason they become friends in the story is because Shelley finds out that she has an opportunity to adopt a little boy from Vietnam, and she doesn't know anything about Vietnam except she knows her husband was spent some time in the war there, but he doesn't talk about it at all. So the only other person that she knows that has anything to do with Vietnam is this woman that runs the Asian grocery store that she sometimes shops at. And she's not really that interested in finding out about the war. She wants to find out about Vietnamese culture so that when she brings this boy home, she can make a comfortable world for him that somehow has a reflection of the things that he would have known in Vietnam. Even though he's only, he's just a baby, or he's going to be about 2 when she brings him home, she wants to be able to cook the foods that he likes and just maybe sing him lullabies that he would know. So that's really important to her. So she approaches this woman, Mai, and at first Mai is really kind of taken aback and not interested, but over time they become friends, and Mai sees this need in Shelley, and she understands the value and the importance of this helping this family to happen, that this child in Vietnam needs a home, and this woman in America wants to have this child and wants to raise this child. So she becomes very invested also in trying to make sure the adoption happens. So she ends up traveling with Shelley to Vietnam, and that's the first time she goes back since she left in 23 years before, and that's her first opportunity to see her family, and she hasn't had any contact with her family, and she left under very troubling circumstances. So she's returning to something. This gets back to this idea of doing something that's very scary. She's returning to a place that is very scary for her, and Shelley also is going somewhere that's completely foreign to her. So they do this very scary thing together. But I think some of you probably write fiction, or maybe you're starting to, I hope. One of the things about writing fiction, and sort of something that comes up a lot among fiction writers, is whose point of view can we write from? Like, I'm an American woman, but I wrote from the point of view of a Vietnamese woman, and is it okay to do that? And how do you do that? And you know, is that, are you making assumptions about that you can possibly understand someone else's life? And yeah, I mean, it's all true. Yes, it's okay to do it. Yes, you are making assumptions. Yes, you should try, because if we didn't do that, and I was talking about this a little bit earlier today, if we didn't try to write in a way that tries to understand people from another point of view, then every novel that you read would be very, very narrow, and we'd never try to push ourselves and try to see the world from other points of view. So I really wanted to try to write from the point of view of a Vietnamese woman, understanding all along that I'm not Vietnamese, and the experience is going to be shaded by that in many ways. So you have to do, if you try to do something like that, you have to do a lot of research. And because I had lived in Vietnam, I already had quite a bit of experience in that country and an ability to write about it, at least as I saw it. But also, I read a lot about Vietnamese history when I read that short part about Mai's mother and the revolutionary times and how difficult life was. That's from spending time reading the history of the country and what happened to people. That was back in the 1950s that they had the revolution, and then the war following, which was the war with us. The revolution was against the French. One thing I want to mention, Wayne Carlin here, who is one of your professors, and of course, as you know, you're very lucky to have him here, because he's really one of the treasures of among American writers in this country. His writing is exquisite. And we met because Wayne started a project to translate Vietnamese literature into English, and he recruited me as one of the team of translators. And I had not read much Vietnamese fiction, and I always translated with a Vietnamese partner. So the Vietnamese was a native speaker in Vietnamese, and I was a native English speaker. And by working that way, we could come as close as possible, well, we would try to come as close as possible, to accurately reflect what the original language was, but also make it expressive in English so that it would be interesting to read in the new language. And going through and reading all this Vietnamese literature really gave me a sense of that perspective, or at least the perspective of a lot of those writers on what happened during the war. And so there's little things that come up in this book based on things that I read in those Vietnamese short stories, like the idea of people not having enough to eat, and you'd have like a bunch of water spinach, which is like spinach but a little bit different, and that the women would learn how to, they'd chop some up and fry it, and some of it they would boil in water, and then the water would have a little bit of flavor, and that would be, you could use that for another meal later. In this way, it's sort of like we hear about Depression era stories, people making do. And a lot of that I got from reading these stories by Vietnamese writers about what life was like then. There's The Distant Stars. There's a really wonderful short story by a writer, Lê Minh Quay, that Wayne introduced me to, and these girls, they clear up the rubble after bombs are dropped on the Ho Chi Minh Trail during the war, but they have these little white shirts they wear that they embroider flowers on. That's, you know, they're these tough girls that go out and almost die every day, but they do these little things to make their lives more beautiful, and to give their lives this kind of value that's separate from what they're doing that's so traumatic. And these little embroidered flowers on the shirts always stuck with me. So I have one of when she was younger, she borrows her sister's shirt that has these embroidered flowers on it, these things that people do to give beauty to their lives, even when it's a very barren world. So having gone through that was really an education for me in being able to write about this Vietnamese person. So I thought a lot about the things that were different and the things that were similar in these women. They had, you know, they came from such different places, but they both were interested in, like, I mean, Mai watched Oprah. She liked Oprah. She had troubles with her family. Shelley had troubles with her family. All sorts of things. So once you get to know your character, you start to feel more that you have more confidence in being able to write about them. So this friendship was developing, and I'm going to read you a little bit from the book about this friendship. Like, I read you a little bit about Shelley, from Shelley's point of view, and a little bit from Mai's point of view, introducing them. And now I'm going to read you a scene from the book. It's from Mai's point of view, but it has Shelley in it. So It's the two of them interacting. And I'm hoping that that'll give you a sense of both the differences between them and also the things that bring them together. So this is page 26, still really early in the book. A few days later, Shelley appears again. This time, Marcy is Maya's assistant. She works for her. At the register, while I perch on a stool back in produce, dividing a crate of basil into 4-ounce plastic bags. Everyone on campus knows me, I hear Marcy say. She's a college student. Even people I don't know, they know me. The girl's body is slender but curvy, and her clothes fit as tightly as the skin on a ripe tomato. It isn't hard to see why she's famous at UNCW. Even in worn jeans and a dirty t-shirt, she looks like one of those talk to a sexy lady girls in the phone number ads on cable. Try studying for a chemistry exam when guys keep wandering by asking for your number, she complains. It must be kind of rough on you. Shelley's voice sounds both sympathetic and amused. Eventually, Shelley wanders back to where I'm working. Hey, she says. She pauses, tugging at a curl. I smile. How you? I ask. Oh, she has a terrible accent. She's very educated, but she has a terrible accent. How you? I ask. I don't want to admit that I've been staying up past 1 a.m. reading and rereading the magazines that she gave me, but I do want to convey that I remember that she brought them. Okay, I guess, she says, wavering a little. I imagine that with a job like hers, as a funeral director, she's always depressed, at least a little. In Vietnam, we didn't mix with funeral people. They kept to themselves, which seemed like the price they paid for earning their livelihood off burying our dead. Her eyes skim the contents of my shelves as if she's glancing through the headlines in the morning paper. I need something good to cook for dinner, she muses. She's tall and sturdy, pretty in a healthy, thoughtless way. Today she wears a silky peacock-colored dress, the kind of thing another woman might flounce in, but she seems indifferent to it. The truth is, a stranger wouldn't notice the dress, not when she's got that hair. Would she need a mirror often just to marvel at it? Would she consider it an asset or a burden or both? I can't even imagine how you'd comb it. My father used to say that the heavens give each person one spectacular gift. Marcy has the body, my mother got her fine gray eyes, my father got his voice, Shelley has that hair. And me? I don't know yet. Shelley picks up a bright yellow packet of Knorr tamarind soup base, looks at the picture on the front. Do people eat this in Vietnam? Tamarind, yeah, but I don't know they have that soup base. You can use it for canh chua, sour soup. Sour soup? Shelley grimaces. I nod my head encouragingly. It's good. When I'm little, my mother make it for me like a special treat. Somehow it seems important that she believe me. It's good. Okay, I'm going to stop. I'm just going to talk a little bit more. If I had never traveled to Vietnam, I would never have made the friends that I've made there, and I would not have been able to write about Maya and Shelley and this relationship that develops between them. And I wouldn't have been talking on the phone just as I did the other day with my friend Thuy, who lives in Vietnam, and she's Vietnamese, and talking about our lives, our children, our husbands. That is something very special to me that makes my life richer, that I can make a phone call from Wilmington, North Carolina, and hear about things going on in Vietnam and really care, because these people mean a lot to me. Because I did things, I can tell you about it, and I see the world in a different way. And one more point, we're talking about Vietnam, and I told you about my childhood, and Vietnam is the background of my childhood in a lot of ways. And you students are not so different from me. You've also grown up with war in the background of your lives. And I imagine that the images that you've been seeing for basically most of your life of Afghanistan and Iraq have affected your life in much the same way that Vietnam affected mine. It seems really far away. It's hard to really imagine those people as real. But on the other hand, we were hearing about it, or we're still hearing about it a lot, and it feels like it's both so important and so unimportant because it's so disconnected. But if you think about those images that you see on the internet or on TV or in the newspapers of Iraq and Afghanistan, sometimes just try to think about those people like I now think of Thuy over in Vietnam, who I can talk to on the phone. And just, if you see a person who looks about your age, don't just think of them as this foreigner, the stranger, a terrorist, or a religious fanatic, whatever. You might think, like, what are those girls thinking about when they're lying in bed at night? And who does that boy love? You know, what's important to these people that doesn't have to do with those things we always hear about. So you might not be able to go visit Iraq or Afghanistan or Pakistan or Somalia or North Korea right now, but someday you might be able to. And right now you could go to Mexico. Mexico is always in the news, but we don't get to really interact with people unless you, I mean, hopefully you meet people in your lives who've come up from there, but also we don't get to interact with people from other countries very often. So go to Mexico and go to the beach with a Mexican farmer, or drink a beer with a student in Italy. Tell them about your life and ask them about your life. I mean, ask them about their life. What, you got it. So you'll find that in the most fundamental ways, these people who seem really, really different from you are really the same. And our differences drive us apart, but our similarities pull us together. And we all eat, and we love, and we cry, sleep, dream, talk, fight, remember? And you see that when you travel.